All right, you guys, welcome back to Freedom Papers. I've got Connor Clegg with me.
Hello, I got Morgan Zegers with us, frankly.
Yep, this is Morgan. I am the host of Freedom Papers, powered by Turning Point USA, and I love having Connor. Connor, you missed last episode when we talked about the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands. It's the land of my people. So we had a blast. I'm just kidding.
I would hate to be a dirty Irish imperialist and get in the way of that. So I'm glad you got that to yourself.
Yeah.
Sure. Whatever.
It's like totally went over my head. Sure. Today we're talking about Federalist Paper 21. But first, you guys, dun dun dun, YWLS is coming up. If you go to tpusa.com/YWLS and use code Morgan, you get 50% off your ticket to the entire conference. How cool is that? Can you believe it's 50% off? I was like, what?
That's a smoking deal.
When did I get so cool? Okay, Morgan, 50% off. tpusa.com/YWLS. I can't wait. It's in Dallas. I love Texas, and I'm sure you love Texas too. Are you going to be there, Connor?
I am going to be there. I am not a woman. There are only two genders, but I will be there to help produce Charlie's radio show because he will be broadcasting live from Dallas all 4 days of YWLS.
Oh, how stinking wonderful. Well, that's quite nice. I love that. I like when men are involved in women's things in a supportive way. You know what I mean? Like, I was talking to you about this last night, actually, when we were watching Charlie debate a trans activist, I guess we could say.
It was a transgender experiment. Kind of like, I don't know, Ken doll, smooth.
Highly aggressive. Okay, either way, Charlie was debating someone on the left who is biological woman, now trans man, if I said that right. And I was talking about how it's nice to have men, masculine, biological men on the conservative side talk about these issues and especially stand up for women in things like protecting women's sports. I think that's really important for men to be involved in that. So thank you guys for doing that. I appreciate it. Let's get into the topic, you guys. We are wrapping up this section on the Articles of Confederation, the inadequacies, and for the longest time we have been doing the same subject continued as the title of all the papers. But you guys, this one's kind of different. This one, Federalist Paper number 21, is first of all only written by Hamilton. Remember, the last few have been written by Madison and Hamilton together. This one is called Other Defects of the Present Confederation. So, kind of a shakeup.
Yeah, no, it's nice to have a little bit of a change here, so
yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, kind of a little bit of a shakeup.
And talking about countries too, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually what the first sentence is all about, of like, you guys, we just ran through three great examples of why confederacies don't work, and I wanted to read it out to you guys to get started. Publius says, having in the last three numbers taken a summary review of the principal circumstances and events which depict the genius and fate of other Confederate governments, I shall now proceed in the enumeration of the most important of those defects which have hitherto disappointed our hopes from the system established among ourselves. What is he saying there, you guys? Basically, he just ran through three examples, case studies of failures in different confederacies around the world, whether it was in the past or for 1787 in the present, for the founders. And now he's going to break down some of the key failures in the founders' form of government, which is the Articles of Confederation. So now we're going to get back to talking about us as a country where we're going wrong. He says, to form a safe and satisfactory judgment of the proper remedy, it is absolutely necessary that we should be well acquainted with the extent and malignity of the disease. Connor, I underlined that one because, wow, what a popular and an important sentence in politics.
It's a very important sentence in politics because at the end of the day, it goes to this idea of self-awareness, which is something that our leaders are so dearly lacking these days, am I right? But so much of our political debate these days exists because those who rule over us fail to actually, and I say this all the time, fail to actually care about us, right? And so they're never going to understand how deep our frustrations go because how could they? You know, a lot of them don't have children. How could they know what it's like to raise a child and how hard it is in America to raise a child because of what they do? So it's really, we have to get our leaders back to what the founders were doing. I feel like this is how we start every show, but it's the most prescient thing you could do, frankly, is we have to get our leaders today to get back to what our founders did in 1787 and think deeply about these things and say, Yeah, I mean, it may be worth understanding the people that we're trying to govern and then understanding the problems that they face so that we can actually solve them.
Yeah, I mean, this quote, I underlined it because it just hits home on so many levels. Let me read it for you guys again one more time. To form a safe and satisfactory judgment of the proper remedy, so basically to find the proper solution to our problems, it is absolutely necessary that we should be well acquainted with the extent and malignity of the disease. So to find the best and proper solution, we need to understand on a deep level the problems that we're facing right now. If you don't understand what you're up against, you're never going to win.
Right.
Now, I saw this as, first of all, the founders did this by evaluating the past, but now they're doing it by evaluating what they're up against in terms of the failures that they are experiencing with their current form of government. And so those are two hits, but now more related to what's going on in America today and more recent world and American history, we need to learn from the past and what our problems are now to best find solutions. That specifically happens with socialism and communism. We need to understand how the previous countries that fell to socialism and communism, how they came to be, how these uprisings occurred in the first place, how these leftists gained power, and then what actions were taken, whether it was the seizing the means of production of the economy, which is socialism. So keep in mind, you guys, socialism isn't just communism, it isn't just another tax. It's an actual economic system where you end private property, where you end private ownership of business, and you have the government take over these things. That is seizing the means of production, nationalizing industries, and that is socialism. So that's one step that countries that have fallen to communism have taken, but other things include things like totalitarianism. And so we saw that with things like Mao Zedong, with the Cultural Revolution. He distorted history and eliminated, and parents were even reported by their own kids for daring to do things like commit wrongthink. Does that remind you of what we experience today, Connor?
Oh, it reminds me exactly what we're experiencing today. There's this weird menage a trois of totalitarianism being had among the American left these days, right? Because it's Marxist, it's communist, it's socialist, all rolled into one. And to me, that makes it really dangerous.
Yeah, and I always say, I used to go on Newsmax a lot more than I do now because now I'm traveling a lot. But whenever we talked about cancel culture, I was like, you guys have to understand, this isn't cancel culture, this is totalitarianism. It's the radical leftists eliminating from society, from the public square, and from positions of power, anybody who dares to commit wrongthink, anybody who goes against their agenda. Not cancel culture, call it what it is, totalitarianism. Same thing like with anti-racism education in schools. No, it's not anti-racism education. That is dangerous curriculum that is distorting American history. That's indoctrination in the public school system. Same thing with like educating kids on gender and stuff. No, that's the over-sexualization of children. So I could go on, but it's really important to understand we're facing these problems in America today, and we can only solve them by understanding what they really are. Understanding them means looking back into the past where they've been tried before. And then the last thing that I noticed with this connection of understanding what we're up against means understanding what we're up against with the radical left today. So understanding these groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, the Justice Democrats, and these actual organized and paid groups that are putting millions of dollars into the community to effectively change it and bring in socialism and communism. I mean, even Black Lives Matter, I mean, they fundraised $90 million in 2020. Do you remember that?
I do.
And what really disturbed me, did you see this? Did you see what the founder of Black Lives Matter said about this? She said, oh yeah, we have all this money, we just haven't spent it yet because we're trying to build a proper foundation across the country to more effectively spend all the money that we've fundraised. We want to make sure that it's going to be effective. That's disgustingly scary.
Well, it's incredibly scary. You know, we talked about this on the Charlie Kirk show, but I have to go back and find it, and we don't have the time to right now, but it was really interesting, and I'll find it for you. I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
A lot of the money that went to Black Lives Matter, it didn't go to helping black communities. A lot of it went to transgender nonprofits. Oh, right?
What?
So, yeah, no, really. I'm going to go find the article. It was an audit. It was very official. But a lot of it went to a certain percentage of it, right? Went to these transgender nonprofits, and we're all sitting here thinking, the transgender population is already very low. The black transgender population is even lower, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are you doing with that money, folks, right? Other than buying houses for yourselves. So, yeah, Black Lives Matter is a total scam, but that's unrelated to any of this.
Very interesting. But like we're kind of trying to get to, all of this behavior is a repeated pattern.
Yeah,
and so our founders knew that when forming this government, they looked to the past. We need to do the same when solving our problems. And that last kind of concept of learning from the past means understanding where our founders' minds were at. So that's what this show is all about. And I just had to give a good shout out to that quote because it really stuck with me after reading this. Publius kind of gets right into the problems here. And that's really what this paper is, kind of listing off the core problems. I think you said, Connor, that you found 3 that he mentioned. We're going to go through them in order. First of all, Publius starts with, the next most palpable defect of the existing confederation is the total want of a sanction to its laws. The United States, as now composed, have no power to exact obedience or punish disobedience to their resolutions, either by pecuniary mulcts, by a suspension or divestiture of privileges, or by any other constitutional means. There is no express delegation of authority to them to use force against delinquent members. So, Connor, what did you take out of that? As I took it out of, if you can't punish people or stop people from not following the rules, then how can you say you have a strong government at all? And how can you hold anybody to anything in your society? You have to have some sort of structure and civilization. What about you?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, but I mean, I could talk about this for days, but someone who does it much more eloquently than I did is Thomas Jefferson. And I know we don't talk about him a lot on here, but I figured it might be a good time to bring him in. One of my favorite quotes. Thomas Jefferson said, "In matters of political power, one must not trust in the alleged goodness of man, but bind him down with the chains of the Constitution."
Ooh.
Isn't that a good quote?
I mean, that.
But that encapsulates exactly what they're talking about. The problem is here, right? Because the Articles of Confederation had this assumption that everyone was just going to act, properly, and they were going to live an ordered, structured life by themselves without any enforcement mechanism. It didn't turn out to be true, after all. Shocker. And so if you don't have order and you don't have guardrails, you have anarchy. And if you have anarchy, you don't have a civilization that can last for very long, because anarchy rejects objectivity. This sounds like word salad here, but speaking of word salad, whenever you have anarchy and you don't have objectivity, and then you have chaos, because that's the natural product of those two things, you have a Tower of Babel situation, which is bound to fall. And then whenever you have the chaos of an immoral society, you have Sodom and Gomorrah, which is bound to fall as well, right? Our founders were deeply, deeply, in many ways, scholars of the Bible. And they understood that if we didn't have a structured society the way that, because that's where structure comes from, folks, right? Structure comes from what they laid out in the Bible for order and for guardrails and for morality. So they realized if we didn't have that, an enforcement mechanism of that somehow, then we would face the same fate as Sodom and Gomorrah. We would face the same fate as the Babylonians, right? And we need to kind of dive really deep into this here, because we're living through something incredibly dangerous when it comes to law and order and structure in America today. But it's a lot more complicated now, because the leaders of the United States are now a lot more complicated. So that's a preview of where we're going, maybe.
I find it so interesting. I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about this. I mean, it is a Turning Point production, the debate last night.
Do it. Yeah, totally.
If I'm okay. So Charlie does debate night, if you guys haven't watched it before, and I'm sure it lives on the YouTube channel or wherever it is with all the other productions.
The Charlie Kirk Show podcast. Make sure you subscribe.
I was filming Freedom Papers yesterday, and I was walking out, and Mikey was like, "Oh, Morgan, are you staying around? Charlie's debating the trans activist tonight." And I was like, "What?" And so I ended up going and having dinner, and then I came back just to sit in the back. It was really dark, but I sat and just typed up some work and stuff. I got to see you in your producer role, which was quite fun. Right. And you were like, "Everybody silence your cell phones." It was cool to see you do your work. But I sat and watched it, and it's just so ironic that we're talking about this paper, which does have that concept of order versus chaos, and the chaos that comes without order, right after hearing that debate, because that's what stuck with me from the debate. And I actually looked up the activist after, and I found some YouTube videos of him. I found a debate where he actually did it with Brandon Tatum. Right. So I was watching that Brandon Tatum video, and one of the things that I've gotten this pushback from people that talk about the 70 genders or whatever they want to say. They say that genders, you can have an unlimited number and it's a spectrum, and why do you need to put a label on things when in reality they're the ones that like all of their weird, empty, baseless labels. Yeah. So they ask, why do you care so much? And my answer has always been kind of simple of, well, we need a reality that we agree on. We need basic truth and fact. And then once we agree on those things, then we can come up with solutions. Then we can have that order in society. But if you're breaking down something as simple as man and woman, where if you have the bones buried up or dug up after they've been buried, years from now, you are either going to have female bones or man bones. And it's as simple as something like that. Now, when they come up with all this fake stuff, it distorts the most basic pillars of society with masculinity and the roles that a man has and the roles that a woman has. You're rejecting science, you're rejecting natural law, and that brings chaos. And so, yes, I care about it when you're trying to teach, especially children, anti-science lies. So I care about it quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I see so much chaos brought to society because of this. Because think of just the breakdown of the family. I mean, it's not that just the LGBTQ community is a little chaotic because they don't embrace gender roles and they don't have their structure. But they are now doing that with more masculine women, more feminine men, and then they reject their roles when they meet in the family, and they try and form this broken family where the woman's leading in a way, but she's going to her job all day. And then she comes home and she's mad that the husband hasn't cleaned or made dinner or isn't contributing in his equal way. And to be honest, I think it's anti-science. I have no other way to describe it now other than anti-science and chaotic. It has created chaos on the most basic level of society.
Well, it creates chaos and it creates anarchy. And I texted Charlie right after the debate last night. I said, biggest takeaway that I got from the discussion was that the left has actually succeeded in killing objective truth and objectivity. And those two things are the linchpin of Western civilization, right? Because if you take everything that we're saying, and I know that we're saying a lot of words that just sound like buzzwords, but if you take it all and boil it down, we have to recognize that we are all adherents to a natural law that relies on objectivity to enact and enforce, right? Mm-hmm. And so what this activist kept saying last night was, well, I'm doing it because it makes me feel good, and that shouldn't matter to you. And Charlie says, well, it matters to me because it's an objective wrong, and you are contributing to the civilizational suicide of the United States. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, that's not really my problem that you feel that way. And it's like, well, no. My belief is grounded in the objective reality that America is dying a slow death because 39% of our youth now are identifying as as LGBTQIA, 2IA, whatever, right? If we go up by 11% on that, we're at 51%. We're extinct as a population, folks. Extinct isn't when we all die. It's when we all become incompatible to procreate and reproduce, right?
And that's what I was thinking. So everybody is so selfish in this way.
They're so selfish.
I believe in service. And not necessarily like you have to go to a soup kitchen every weekend, but I believe in serving others. And when you serve others, even in the most basic way as serving your husband or serving your children, serving a family member, and not, people have a hard time with the word submit. Like a wife should submit to his husband or to her husband. I think that's fine, and I plan on doing that. But now you can't even say that these days without being called like a Handmaid's Tale member.
Yeah.
And so it's weird that we can't even talk about that stuff, but we have gotten so selfish that we don't believe in serving others in any way, even just the basics of serving our family. And I wonder, that selfishness has led to us not understanding the very basic fact that humans are animals, and our first and only priority has pretty much, like all other animals, for a very long time been to continue the human race, to procreate, make babies, raise them to be sustainable humans that will then do the same. Now, we live half of our lives, and then people in their late 30s, out of their ovulation time period, are saying, okay, now I've done all the stuff that I wanted to do, I'll settle down and have kids. And guess what? They have a lot of problems with it. It is chaos caused by this wokeness that has been put into us, caused by the disorder, and it makes me really sad. We've gotten so far away from all of it that we don't even remember that as animals, our priority, our instinctual priority should be to procreate and raise up babies. And we act like it's selfish, or we act like it's a sacrifice to now have to give up our things that we want to do in life to then raise a child. But that should be the most important priority that we have, to raise a kid up to become a viable adult and a strong adult in society. And then they do the same, and then they do the same. And it's such a basic concept. It's in my head all the time now, and I can't really put it into words. But it all gets back to that idea of disorder. makes me really sad. Like, people don't even want to have kids because they think maybe I'll do it after I'm done with all the other stuff that I want to do. But that's the end of the human race, if you think about it like that.
It's really bad news. That if you look at stock prices for egg freezing companies,
Oh my gosh.
there's like a massive run on the stocks of those because they're saying buy because they're going to go up in the coming years because so many women are freezing their eggs. So many corporations are incentivizing women to freeze their eggs through their work, and it's like, this is weird and this is creepy and it's not conducive to a strong society. We just got done talking about this on live. There's so many interconnected shows we're talking about here. How fun is that,
well,
right?
I kind of like it. I'm glad we're talking on all things more about these cultural things.
That's
I
like
like
what we
the
need to talk
culture
about.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's something, like, speaking of the disorder and the chaos, it is now normalized to be like, oh, well, we have X number of kids and then X number on ice. Have you ever heard that? That's like
No.
a phrase now. And I had to look it up. It means that you have that many waiting that are currently frozen.
I mean,
Isn't that quite... I'm happy for them. I am. But I think I'm more so sad that as a society, we have gone so far away from the concept of having babies at the biologically right time.
Right.
And we have made women feel like they have to be boss babes. Now, I've also I've joked with another example of the chaos and the disorder is that our culture is so negative that women, even if they're like me, like, I want to have babies one day, I can't wait to homeschool, I would like to get married, it's a hard dating world out there.
Yeah,
And
totally.
so the culture is so negative that even women that want to do it can't get themselves into a place to find someone and to find someone that wants to do it with them because the men aren't taught that they're supposed to lead a family, they're supposed to find a wife, they're supposed to provide, and they're supposed to lead that family unit. And so there's a lot of women that I know that don't want to have to boss babe, but they're kind of at a point where they're like, you know what? I can't make it work in any other way. I'm going to have to provide for myself and do this. So I have to embrace the boss babe phase.
Right.
And the next thing you know, you're in your 30s, and they don't necessarily want to be there. They wish they were in a different position, but society has put us onto this fast track to being a boss babe.
Yeah, that's because,
Chaos.
to your point, self-preservation as a human instinct kicks in at that point. But self-preservation is one of our most base instincts. It's not something that is more, formed by enlightenment and words and speech and community, right? Mm-hmm. So animals have self-preservation, right? Really simple animals. They're going to go hide under a leaf if it's raining and they're very small, like an ant or something, right? I'm not well-versed in animals, sorry. Right? But animals have self-preservation.
Yeah.
That's their whole thing. We have much higher values and higher virtues that we should pursue. To get back to the paper.
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute.
We, of course, and look, we're fine. But I do think that Hamilton was talking about kind of an anarchy in the streets in terms of like crime and lawlessness and stuff like that. And that's happening too, just so we're clear. Like it's this perfect storm. But what I think is a little bit more applicable in a long-term sense is we need to have the ability to enforce laws that maybe aren't written yet, but maybe they should be written to actually enable a society that nurtures the good and the permanent and the orderly and the truly right and just, right?
Yeah.
Legislating morality actually works. Look at Texas. So abortion, I think we can all agree, is a terrible thing. Abortions have gone down by 60% since Texas decided they were going to legislate morality, which the libertarians tell us we can't do, and passed their abortion law, SB 8, and the Supreme Court upheld it, right? So, yeah, it actually works. Try it. I promise. It could work, And it's like, well, the left is going to use it against you. Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe if you just, create a society in the time that you have power where people are really excited to live there and they really like what you do and you actually work for them and not for the mega corporations or for China or for the military-industrial complex, then maybe people will reelect you, and you're never going to have to worry about the left again. They're going to end up like the Whigs, right?
Yeah.
That's a reality that we take for granted.
I mean, I always say, like, if I think of my big vision of, like, if I could achieve something in life, first of all, I don't have career goals. People
It's
ask
good
me
for
that
you.
a
More
lot.
people need to like adopt that.
Thank you. As a woman, I have definitely life goals, and I have things that I would like to do, but they aren't around a career. I'm really thankful that the work that I do is flexible and fulfilling, and so I can keep doing it if I want to, and it helps me provide for the family if I ever need to, but I just hope that I don't have to, and I can homeschool and be a full-time mom. But one day. That being said, I think about how fun it would be to sit in rooms. Like, I don't know if maybe we should do this at Turning Point. Like, if we should sit in rooms and kind of brainstorm a vision of, like, if we could make something happen, if we were given power, what would we do to shape the country? I don't know if we could do it through Turning Point, but maybe just a few of us should get together for dinner and, like, whiteboard it out. Because there's things that I would like to achieve. One of those things is I want to make it so that a family can sustain itself in America, not just sustain itself, but thrive in America on a one income family. It's like, so, okay, so then what do we have to do that? Another thing, upending and completely reforming the education system in the country. There's things that I would just love to do, and I think we should start thinking boldly about that. Now, we went on a rant. Let's get back to the paper. You guys, we're all about chaos in this paper of what is going to cause chaos and then what's going to be the negative consequence of chaos and lack of order. So getting back to what Publius is saying, in this, the first problem he was talking about was the ability to sanction laws, the ability to enforce, and then the ability to punish people that don't follow. He goes on to talk, and he says, if we are unwilling to impair the force of this applauded provision, we shall be obliged to conclude that the United States afford the extraordinary spectacle of a government destitute even of the shadow of constitutional power to enforce the execution of its own laws. It will appear from the specimens which have been cited that the American Confederacy in this particular stands discriminated from every other institution of a similar kind and exhibits a new and unexampled phenomenon in the political world. A lot's in there. I took out of that a few different things. I thought it was interesting. So he's saying that we're very unique. We aren't exactly like any of the examples that we talked about in the previous papers. We're more so a combination of some of their good parts, but a lot of their bad parts. Yes. And not only that, but what makes us worse is that we lack even the shadow of a constitutional power to basically bring accountability when there's wrongdoing. Would you say that's what he's kind of getting at there, Connor?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just like a child who goes unpunished. I don't have children, but we all know this principle. Mm-hmm. A child who goes unpunished and they're not told that they're in the wrong will continue to do the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. An object in motion stays in motion. That goes back to the idea of natural law and objective truth, right? So if a state continues to, decide to conquer or to invade or to do whatever, and it's left unchecked, it will only continue to rot and erode the rest of the civilization. So we can't have that. That's all he's saying, and he's totally right.
Yeah. I like this paper. As we go through it, I'm kind of like,
It's kind of quaint.
Yeah, I have little stars by all the nice sentences because they're profound. They're kind of hard to understand in many ways. They take rereading, but they're profound once you start to realize what he's getting at.
And I like that we're back here because as much as I enjoyed kind of the history lessons of the last few papers, it's like those were more. I'm so far removed from college. Those were more just kind of like straightforward writing. This has more flair to it. It gets back to the idea of like a beautiful language and, the way that they used to communicate back in the day. And that's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but that also goes into this idea of what's good and right and true and permanent and just, right, is objective beauty too, right? And the founders had such an appreciation for that. You can see in the passion that they put into the papers.
Yeah, that's actually, I thought of you because yesterday for the paper I read, Anti-Federalist 18 through 20, and he makes fun of the Federalists for using allegory and using pretty language, and he signs off, I think, a Newport Man. Have you read those ones?
Not in years.
He ends it and he's like, I'm not going to BS you. I'm not going to give you fruitful language right now. I'm going to sign off in plain English. A Newport Man. And I was like, this is so good. I know that I really want to start doing a better job of finding the connection for each paper so that we can see, because they hit at each other quite a lot. Yeah. And so we're only on paper 20, so we've got plenty of opportunity to start doing this. But it is, you guys, if you read the Federalist paper and then the pairing anti-Federalist essays that come out with it, oh my gosh, it can be quite entertaining. Yeah. And it's just a good reminder that back then and even the centuries before them, humans go at it and they debate, and what made us so exceptional is that we established a country where you can go at each other in a way that is respectful and safe and not going to always lead to civil war.
Right.
That being said, things are a
little
spicy
these
days. But I give him kudos for creating an environment for at least a small amount of time.
Amen.
Let's move on. So he goes on and he says, the want of a mutual guarantee of the state governments is another capital imperfection in the federal plan. There is nothing of this kind in the articles that compose it, and to imply a tacit guarantee from considerations of utility would be a still more flagrant departure from the clause which has been mentioned, than to imply a tacit power of coercion from the like considerations. The want of a guarantee though it might in its consequences endanger the Union, does not so immediately attack its existence as the want of a constitutional sanction to its laws. What's he going at here? What did you...
Well,
I'm just going to toss it over to you on this
of
one.
course. So, I mean, this was basically about protection from the federal government for the smaller states, right? This is something we've talked about on a lot of the other papers when it comes to confederacies and the weaknesses of them, and this is one of the most obvious weaknesses of the confederacies. But you have to think about the way that America was structured at the time. It's a little bit hard for us to comprehend now because we've always known America to be this confederation or this federal system of 50 states, right? Well, at the time, we were colonies, later on states, that bordered foreign countries, right? So, like, you could be an American state that shares a border with Spain, for all intents and purposes, right? So who's to say that Spain doesn't just decide to invade Georgia or, South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
That's what they were saying here is, like, the state of South Carolina in and of itself, without very much power to levy taxes, not to mention a large population to levy taxes from, or a fighting age population with which to fight, could not possibly take on the Spanish Armada, right?
That's a great connection.
And that's what it's all about here.
I like
And
that.
They wanted a blanket protection that said if one state is attacked, then the federal government is going to come in. It's kind of like what we're dealing with NATO right now. It's like if a NATO member nation is attacked by a foreign nation who's not in NATO, then we're all going to come in and help you out.
Yeah.
So that's what they were doing here.
Okay. No, that we have talked about that so much. Okay, so thank you for making that connection. I appreciate that. This is where things got good for me. I really liked this part. And so if you guys are listening and you listened to the last episode where we read the anti-federalist essays, I want to know if you noticed this too. You might not notice this, Connor, but we read them out and he mentions some names. This guy then comes in, Hamilton, and he mentions those names, but flips the narrative and says, no, this is why I'm actually right with those same examples that you cited. So I thought that was awesome. And again, I love seeing that back and forth. So he says, without a guarantee, the assistance to be derived from the Union in repelling those domestic dangers, which may sometimes threaten the existence of the state constitutions, must be renounced. Usurpation may rear its crest in each state and trample upon the liberties of the people, while the national government could legally do nothing more than behold its encroachments with indignation and regret. So problems could be caused by the states, and the federal government really has nothing that it can do other than say, bad. No, state, don't do that. Don't oppress your people. So obviously that'd be a problem, right? The federal government should be able to protect its people. And we've seen that in the last papers quite a lot, where Publius is saying we need a connection between the American people and the American government, not just a connection between this league of states created, between this like league that's been created and the actual states within the league. There's got to be a connection between the government and the people themselves. He says a successful faction may erect a tyranny on the ruins of order and law. And then he goes on to say the tempestuous situation from which Massachusetts has scarcely emerged evinces that dangers of this kind are not merely speculative.
Right.
And so the situation that happened in Massachusetts with the uprising proves that this just isn't a maybe. It's already happened.
Right.
It could happen again. And look how close we were to not being able to solve this problem. He says, who can determine what might have been the issue of her late convulsions if the malcontents in Massachusetts had been headed by a Caesar or by a Cromwell? Who can predict what effect a despotism established in Massachusetts would have upon the liberties of New Hampshire or Rhode Island, of Connecticut or New York? You guys, what a smack in the face to the Anti-Federalists. Because in the last papers, do you remember what they said is that the men who rose up, I don't know if you saw this, Connor. It's so good.
I'm putting it together. I remember reading that.
Yeah. And
a long
so
time ago, but I remember
the
that.
Anti-Federalists were saying it's never been a problem in a situation like a Caesar or a Cromwell or all of the guys that have kind of led up to oppress the people in their countries. They were like, those were people that are from those countries, and they rose up, grabbed power in their own country, and then oppressed their own people and hurt their own people. That's what's going to happen in America. It's not going to be a foreign danger. They were saying if you give the federal government too much power, a Caesar or a Cromwell will rise up and hurt other people. And so then the Federalists strike back, and they also cite Caesar and Cromwell. But they say, okay, so what if that does happen? What if in these states, because there's no check on them right now, what if a Caesar or a Cromwell does rise up? We have nothing to stop them.
Yeah.
What a smackdown.
Well, because you have to think about it. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right, he was, for all intents and purposes, coming from, a different state outside of Rome, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly how it actually happened in real life. The Anti-Federalists were a little bit out of touch, quite frankly. Yeah, it was within the same republic, but Caesar went from outside of Rome into Rome and attacked it. And so it's like, yeah, Hamilton's obviously smarter here, so maybe it pays to be, a little bit allegorical and fluffy, right, with your language.
And it's fun to see these connections. I wrote in the sidelines, back at ya. Oh, man. All right, so next problem we're going to talk about. Publius says, the inordinate pride of state importance has suggested to some minds an objection to the principle of a guarantee in the federal government, as involving an officious interference in the domestic concerns of the members. A scruple of this kind would deprive us of one of the principal advantages to be expected from union, and can only flow from a misapprehension of the nature of the provision itself. It could be no impediment to reforms of the state constitutions by a majority of the people in a legal and peaceable mode. This right would remain undiminished. The guarantee could only operate against changes to be effected by violence. Towards the preventions of calamities of this kind, too many checks cannot be provided. Too many checks cannot be provided. What a good statement. Mm-hmm. He says the peace of society and the stability of government depend absolutely on the efficacy of the precautions adopted on this head. Where the whole power of the government is in the hands of the people, there is the less pretense for the use of violent remedies in partial or occasional distempers of the state. The natural cure for all ill administration in a popular or representative constitution is a change of men. So not violence is how I took that.
Right.
A guarantee by the national authority would be as much leveled against the usurpations of rulers as against the ferments and outrages of faction and sedition in the community. That's a big paragraph. I really liked that because we're starting to talk a little bit more about what it means to have representative leaders. I mean, that's something that we haven't really talked about before. We did a little bit on democracy versus republics, but we haven't talked about the benefits of saving us from tyranny when it comes to electing our leaders. That's something that's kind of a new topic in the papers.
Yeah, and to me it goes back to the very first paragraph of this entire paper where he talks about the defects that they have in their own system and being willing to actually, kind of dive deep and understand those. I go through and I read this paper, and some of the underlying things that maybe you don't pick up on, but I'm starting to notice patterns, is that they're getting more and more comfortable talking about this idea of a national identity, and that only being possible within a Republican system, a Federalist Republican system here. So it's like we as a federal government are not going to be as willing to go in and be violent against our fellow citizens. And we would expect the same from the states to not uprise against the government because we share this common bond. We're united by culture, and we're united by heritage, we're united by geography, and we're united by the prudence and wisdom of God to all places on this beautiful, massive land at the same place, right? And so he's saying, like, why don't we have a little bit of trust in each other and say, we're going to have to collect taxes, we're going to have to make this thing work, but there's a way to get it done without having to kill each other. Because that's how it's always been. We're not going to be, we're not going to be serfs. We're not going to be slaves. We're not going to be, kings and rulers or anything like that, ruled and rulers. We're citizens. Mm-hmm. And the advent of citizens as opposed to subjects, that's the most revolutionary idea to come out of the entire early American experiment. And that, to me, is the first time that I'm starting to see this idea actually flesh itself out. So that's really exciting.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Great noticing that.
Fired up here.
Yeah.
As always.
Let's get into wrapping this up because I can't believe this has flown by. We talked about so many random things at the same time. But this is a good paper.
It is a good paper.
The last issue that they talk about is this concept of quotas. So what we've noticed in this trend of talking about different confederacies and talking about the Articles of Confederation is the idea that every state is sovereign and just kind of put together on this team, this league of states, this league of sovereign states. And these sovereign states have quotas or expectations of what they're going to contribute. And what we learned through history and what we're learning now with the Articles of Confederation, or at least what they were learning now at the time back then, was that it was really hard to have fair expectations of contributions by states. Not everybody contributed, and then when you don't contribute or don't follow the rules, are you supposed to invade each other to then expect them to start acting like a proper teammate, or are you supposed to let people not contribute, and then what kind of chaos and disorder does that bring? So there's a bunch of problems that come with it, but he goes on to talk about why there needs to be a greater relationship and power between the people of America and the federal government, not just this expectation of the states to handle all of this and then contribute some amount or some sort of resource to the league.
It wasn't like a tithe, it was like a commitment, right?
Yeah. And so he says the wealth of nations depends upon an infinite variety of causes: situation, soil, climate, the nature of the productions, the nature of the government, the genius of the citizens, the degree of information they possess, the state of commerce, of arts, of industry. These circumstances and many more, too complex, minute, or adventitious, I'm going to say that, to admit of a particular specification, occasion differences hardly conceivable in the relative opulence and riches of different countries. The consequence, clearly, is that there can be no common measure of national wealth, and of course no general or stationary rule by which the ability of a state to pay taxes can be determined. And so all these states are different. Their economies are different. Their goods that they even sell and produce are different because their soils are different. There's so many different factors. You can't fairly expect states to contribute equal amounts, and then how do you even determine what equal is from a state by state case? So to them, they're saying that we need to find a better way to accumulate wealth for the country without expecting the states to handle it all, right?
I mean, generally speaking, that was my takeaway, but at the end of the day, they also established this doctrine of fairness where it's like, and we obviously see what happened. We had to have the states pay. States have to kind of, the citizens within their states have to pay their fair share to the states, and the states have to, do what they have to do with the government. So I'm no tax expert, obviously, but at the end of the day, you know what? I'm going to give you my takeaway here. I'm going to give you my takeaway. It's a little bit unorthodox.
Go ahead.
This
is a strange topic.
I think it's a little bit more beautiful here, right? So I don't go to D.C. often. I try to make it a habit not to go there very often. I think it's kind of a dark place, but it is beautiful. It's objectively beautiful, right? Yeah. There's a reason why it is objectively beautiful, right? Because they wanted to create this shrine to the ideas that bind our culture together and not just make it some sort of like, brutalistic place where you just have to go pay your taxes to, right? And then, give your contribution to and your offerings and stuff, right? We should be proud of the nation that we live in. Just like whenever we go to church and they pass the plate around, we should be proud to give to our church community, right? Because it's like, you are doing me a great service by allowing me to be a part of this community, right? Which they can't turn you away, obviously, in a church, but it's a little bit different with a nation, isn't it? So if you're an American, you should, and this is not the conservative thing to say, or the right-wing thing to say, there's something actually very empowering about paying taxes when you have a good, just, moral government. So that said, there hasn't been something empowering about paying taxes for a very long time, right? But that's kind of like closing the loop and bringing it all back together.
Order.
If we can establish a government that is ordered and structured and just, then you're going to do a lot better at raising revenue, and you're going to have a stronger nation and a more secure nation because you're probably going to have more people actually willing to pay taxes for it, right?
Yeah, no, Connor, I love that. I'm very much in the camp of saying taxation is a necessary thing in a civilized society. You need it. I don't think all taxation is theft. I think at where we are now in America, it's out of control. It's insane. The fact that we pay a third of our income to the government and basically feel like we are getting nothing back
Yeah.
is insane to me. The executive branch now being handed massive spending power when it's supposed to be in the hands of Congress only, thanks to these massive legislative spending bills that give the bureaucracy all this power. That's how you end up with things like Fauci spending money and approving the funding of torturing puppies. It's a whole mess. That being said, I understand the value of creating beautiful government buildings. I understand the sense of national pride that comes with that. And then what a great way to end the paper. Good job, Connor. Way to bring that in. What a surprise.
I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about with taxes, but I can talk about that.
I read it and I was like, oh, okay, we're ending on like, okay, so there has to be some sort of national way to bring in money. And then you're like, look at this beautiful message that we're getting at the end. So thanks for ending with that.
I mean, there's one of two ways to do it. You either do it by gunpoint or you do it by,
Yeah. You can inspire to join. Well, that's the thing. There's a whole problem with conservatives, I think, forgetting that you're supposed to act in a way that inspires people to join you.
Exactly.
And doesn't make them hate you and
Correct.
Never want to join your side.
Correct.
I believe in acting in a way that inspires people to join me, and I think you do the same. I don't hope. I know that
I'm a little bit more unorthodox, but yeah.
Oh, I think you do the same. You guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope that this made sense. It was about the need for order and structure in a civilized and functioning and successful society,
and a
thriving
society.
Look at us. I liked this one. You guys, thanks for tuning in. Use code Morgan for 50% off your ticket to YWLS, the Young Women's Leadership Summit. tpusa.com/YWLS. Connor, thank you for joining as usual.
In
you
Dallas,
brighten
Texas.
my day whenever you come on.
Thank you. God, that was sweet. Thank you, Morgan.
No.
Bye, everybody.